Okay. So no matter which market, we're going to look at four different scenarios of externalities and market failure. But no matter which market we look at, we can measure the cost or the benefit of consuming or producing a good or service, and the marginal private benefit of a good or service is always going to be downward sloping. Okay, so this is the marginal private benefit. This might be the first time you've heard of marginal. What's your understanding of what marginal private benefit might mean? Yeah, so the C/B means cost or benefit.
Okay.
You could do PCB, price cost benefit. So just the new word we just learned, marginal. Marginal means for each additional unit. So an
Oh yeah.
example would be with eating chocolate. You would never, let's say popcorn, okay, or chocolate. You would never consider that, okay, I'm going to have 7 pieces of chocolate. That would maximize my utility. You're just going to decide, should I have 1 piece of chocolate? Once that's finished, you would consider, should I have another piece of chocolate? Once that's finished, you would consider, should I have another piece of chocolate, or am I like bored of it now, right?
Yeah.
So in economics, we often think at the margin, meaning we think about the next unit and then the next unit and then the next unit.
Okay.
So the marginal private benefit of any typical good or service is downward sloping, meaning that when you eat your first piece of chocolate, you have a very high utility from it. When you eat your second piece of chocolate, you have a slightly lower utility from the second piece, and the third piece is even lower, but still probably quite high because chocolate is yummy. And then when you eat your 10th piece, the utility is very low because
Yeah.
you're
Wait. I
getting.
think covered that.
So you would have heard of it as diminishing marginal utility.
That's it. Yeah.
So yeah, it's the same idea. But yeah, for externalities, just remember marginal private benefit is just another way of showing the diminishing marginal utility of a product.
Okay.
So whether it's a chocolate or whether it's driving or cycling or whatever it is, or going to the gym, in almost every good or service, the marginal private benefit is downward sloping.
Okay.
Okay. The next thing we want to show is an upward sloping marginal private cost. This one you would have definitely not heard of. We learn about it actually more in year 13, but very briefly, the idea being that if you have a cafe or a farm or some kind of small business,
Yeah.
when you add one member of staff and one machine, you can get a lot of work done and you can produce coffee all day and you can sell like a lot of coffee and bakery items and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
When you add 2 workers, 3 workers, 4 workers, 5 workers, because you're not able to change how big the coffee shop is, the cost is actually increasing each time. They're going to get slightly slower on average because in this same space, let's say I had one machine, 1 worker. Like let's say now I have 4 machines. We need tables as well, right? So we have these machines on the side, and these are the tables for customers to sit on.
Yeah.
I can add 1 worker, 2 workers, 3 workers, 4 workers. If I add 5, 6, 7, 8 workers, it's just gonna get slower and slower. They're
Oh
gonna
yeah.
bump into each other, okay? But basically, all you need to remember right now, don't worry about what I just explained too much. You just need to know that marginal private cost is always upward sloping. The additional cost to produce an extra coffee just gets higher and higher each time.
Okay. The additional cost to produce an
Yeah.
extra. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can produce one coffee in a minute. You can produce the second coffee in a minute and a half, the third coffee in 2 minutes, the fourth coffee in 3 minutes. Just think of it like that because you have to keep adding more staff and they're just going to bump into each other. It's going to be chaotic.
Yeah.
It's still good, but they'll just be slower each time.
Okay. Yeah.
It's like the equivalent of you learning on your own versus you learning with a friend and then 2 friends and 3 friends. Like when you go to school, there'll be so many people. The productivity
Yeah.
and the cost to teach many students will be slow.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so MPC is always upward sloping. Wherever the marginal private cost and the marginal private benefit intersect, that's the quantity Q1, meaning this is the equilibrium outcome in a free market. In a free market where we don't consider society, we only consider the buyer and the seller, they are going to produce and consume at the point Q1 where MPC equals MPB. So in a free market, the outcome is always the quantity where MPB equals MPC. This maximizes the welfare of the buyer and the seller.
Yeah. Does a free market just mean like no government intervention?
Yeah.
Okay.
So buyer and seller are happy. Remember last time we looked at some examples of externalities. So let's do chocolate as the first example. If I have chocolate, I get utility from eating chocolate.
Yeah. What does that say underneath chocolate? Private.
The private is like my utility. I wouldn't write this, just understand it. Don't write this bit.
Okay.
The private benefit is my utility, my personal satisfaction of enjoying my chocolate. The effect on the third party is a small burden on the NHS. Obviously, like it's just a small thing. If you have a bit of chocolate, there's no harm. But if you consider the whole of society eating a lot of chocolate, you end up like, for example, in America, there's more of an obesity crisis because people eat very unhealthy food. So if I said fast food, there'll be a burden on the healthcare system, right?
Yeah.
So
Does
overall,
utility just mean private benefit?
pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
And then if you take into account the private and the third party as a whole, you get society, right? So
Yeah.
just remember, private is the buyer and the seller. The third party is anyone apart from the buyer or the seller.
Okay.
So if I do it for this example, negative consumption, externalities like chocolate. Actually, I'm just going to write fast food. There's nothing specifically good or bad about making fast food or making chocolate, you would argue. Well, let's assume when you consume chocolate, if at each level of output, that's the marginal private benefit, while the social benefit will always be a touch lower. So that would be the marginal social benefit. Does that make sense?
Wait, so marginal private.
Think of marginal social benefit as the same as marginal private benefit, plus we factored in the rest of society's preferences as well.
Okay.
So, for example, the buyer enjoys chocolate. The buyer enjoys his McDonald's, his fast food. Because the buyer eats fast food, there's a bit more of a strain on the NHS. So
Yeah.
the social benefit is slightly lower because the social benefit factors in, cool, these guys enjoy their McDonald's, but there's a strain on the NHS, so we just have to drop it.
Because the social benefit is society as a whole. So is it them as well as society?
Yeah.
Okay.
So them and the third party.
Okay.
Yeah. So MSB is the lower.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And then we just add equals MSC here. just because there's no issue in the production side of things. Okay, moving on to the next one, we'll do positive consumption externalities. And an example of that would be a bicycle. People enjoy riding bicycles. It's quite fun, especially younger people. So they'll go to school on a bike instead of walking, or on the bus, or they'll go for a ride around the park or something like that. But that's what the buyer thinks. Okay. Society's actually secretly happy that people are riding bikes, you could argue, because the more people that ride bikes, there's a healthier society, but also there's less people driving or less people using public transport.
Oh yeah.
Public transport is less busy, but also less pollution from the people who would have otherwise driven. So as a result, if at each level of output that's the marginal private benefit, well, the social benefit is just going to be a touch higher every single level of output. So that's going to be your marginal social benefit. And again, there's no issues in the thing. There's nothing good or bad specifically about making the bicycle. So we just say equals MSC. So do you have any questions about the negative consumption or the positive consumption externalities?
No.
Okay.
And
then the bit where the other intersection
wait, I do
point.
actually.
Yeah.
You know, for in an exam, would you have to talk about?
So we'll do a paragraph at the end, but for the other intersection, we're just going to write Q star, which was the last thing I was going to explain. So here, you know how I said the free market outcome is where the marginal private benefit equals the marginal private cost? Well, the socially optimal outcome is where MSB equals MSC, because these are the correct curves that factor in society's preferences. So now social welfare is maximized. In other words, the combination of the buyer, the seller, and the third party, so society as a whole, they are happy, not just the buyer and the seller. So here, the third party are harmed. Okay, because remember, externalities are the spillover effects from a transaction on a third party. Moving on then to, well, what do you think the last two types of externalities are?
Would it be negative production?
Yeah. So an example of negative production would be producing magazines. There's nothing specifically good or bad about reading a magazine. It's just a normal thing to do. It depends on whether it's an educational magazine or like just an entertainment magazine. But the fact that you're producing magazines in this day and age means that you're cutting down trees, wasting paper, causing environmental damage when the magazine could have been like an email or online, right?
Yeah.
So to illustrate that, we just need to say equals MSB down here, because there's no harm or benefit from consuming the magazine. But if it costs £1 to make a magazine or 50p to print a magazine, whatever it is, it's gonna cost a tiny bit higher if we're actually factoring in the environmental damage that we weren't factoring in before.
Yeah.
So that's going to be your, and don't draw the arrows by the way, I'm just showing you, but then that's your MSC. And then that is your Q star. Okay, perfect. Same rules apply. Where MPB equals MPC, the buyer and the seller, the consumer and the producer are happy. Where MSC equals MSP, society is happy. In a free market, we would be at Q1. In an ideal world, we'd be at Q star.
Yeah.
The last one is almost never asked, so we don't really have to
Wait, what
worry.
would you call the
And then the final situation is a positive production externality. You won't really be asked about these because they're not
no
like
such?
the most common thing in the world anyway.
Yeah.
But an example would be honey. Don't ask me why, just scientifically, if farmers produce honey, they keep bees or something and that pollinates nearby plants, so that's meant to be a good thing. We don't need to know the science
Oh
or
yeah.
geography behind it. But the point is, it's nothing good or bad about eating honey. It's actually quite good to produce honey. So if I factored that in, well, I would say MSB, there's nothing good or bad in the consumption side of things. In the production side of things, it would actually just be a touch lower always. Because we factored in, yeah, it costs a certain amount of money to produce honey, but there's actually a benefit of producing it. So that would be your MSC curve. And then that would be your Q star. And then if we look at them as a whole, it's optional to do the price. You could do that with the Q1, you could do a P1, you don't have to. But the important thing here is that we're able to explain that in the free market there are the problems of overconsumption, underconsumption, overproduction.
Oh yeah.
Underproduction and overproduction.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Any
Yeah, I
questions?
understand. Yeah, so you know when you're, in fact we'll cover this when we're doing the exam question, but basically when you're describing the graph, you would just say that
Yeah, so for the purpose of an exam question, you might be asked to do a specific example, fast food, or you might be just asked to do a market failure of your choice in general. So let's say we're doing, we'll do the negative externality one, yeah?
okay. In fact I also have a question about that. How do you how could you tell like when you need to talk about externalities if it hasn't explicitly said it in the question?
So remember that market failure, which we did, is when there's a misallocation of resources.
Yeah.
So that's your starting point. You could define market failure as a misallocation of resources. If the question asks you about a market failure, you could do externalities. The only time you can't is, remember there's two types, there's partial and complete.
Yeah.
If the question is asking you to talk about complete market failure, you can't do externalities. That's only a partial market failure.
So what do you talk about if it's complete?
Try and remember, we did it last time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, complete market failure is testing you on if you remember the specific example of a missing market, and that happens with public goods, with the free rider problem.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
then if it
Okay, yeah.
asks you about partial market failure, you do externalities.
Okay.
Okay, because
Okay, so
partial
like
market failure is when there's overproduction, underproduction, overconsumption, underconsumption. And alternatively, they could ask you, wait, talk about the market failure with sugary drinks, talk about the market failure with fast food, talk about the market failure with vapes, talk about this, that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions?
So you know the question I said.
Yeah.
So when it says evaluate, this is a 25 market evaluate. Okay.
If it's about policies, we're going to come to that. That's when we have to fix these issues. So right now we have to answer how to what the actual issues are, and then we'll come back to it in another. After this, we'll do all the government interventions, the ways to correct these issues. So we'll understand what methods
Oh
can be
yeah, I
used to
see. I
correct them.
see. Yeah.
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 So
Yeah.
you could use it for this question. Explain why sugary drinks are overconsumed. You have to do externalities to explain that, right?
You talk about negative consumption
Yeah.
externalities.
And the question that we kept on talking about was this question. Explain the difference between complete and partial market failure. Complete market failure, the free rider problem. Remember, I asked you to do half of it, just the complete part.
Yeah.
So this is,
And what would you write for partial market
yeah, that's what
failure?
we're
Just
doing now.
okay.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So you could say one example of. So first of all, market failure is when there's a misallocation of resources.
Yeah.
Okay. One example of partial market failure is the issue of externalities in the fast food market.
Okay.
Okay. Externalities are the negative externalities are the negative spillover effect of a transaction on the third party. The diagram shows the negative externalities in the market for fast food. In the free market, producers and consumers maximize their own utility in terms of their own self-interest. Therefore, there is an output of Q1 in the free market. MSB is smaller than MPB because MSB, like the equation is social benefit. Wait, I'm just going to give you two equations, yeah? Social benefit equals private benefit plus external benefit, or social cost equals private cost plus external cost.
Wait, I got a question about
So in this case, we're talking about the first equation. So I would say since social benefit is the private benefit plus the external benefit of a transaction, fast food, the private benefit is high as is enjoyable for people to consume fast food. The external benefit is negative, which means social benefit is lower. So you just have to say social benefit takes into account both the private benefit, the utility, the satisfaction of consuming fast food, plus the harmful effects to the third party. One example of the harmful effects of fast food consumption to the third party is an increase in obesity, which which increases the burden on the NHS.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. As a result, the diagram shows the socially optimal quantity is Q star, which is found where MSB equals MSC. Therefore, the diagram shows there's an overconsumption of fast food in the free market.
Yeah.
Perfect. But like, there's a bunch of examples here. You can just check them afterwards. So negative externalities.
Oh, so externalities are an example of market failure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, to be fair, it's like the only main example, but yeah, it is an example of partial market failure.
Okay.
Cool. Or cause of partial market failure. So negative externalities in consumption occur when the consumption of a good or service has a negative spillover impact on a third party. the third party being someone apart from the buyer or the seller. The more regularly people eat unhealthy fast food, their health worsens, more chance of obesity, more burden on the NHS, more burden on the taxpayer. These externalities are ignored in the free market. In the free market, the outcome is where MPB equals MPC, the Q1. The socially optimal outcome is where MSB equals MSC, the blue ones.
Yeah.
So there's clearly an overconsumption in the market.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'll type it out in full and you can read that properly. Again, it doesn't have to be like word for word. There's different ways to write it, but the idea being you're covering the difference between MPB and MSB. You're covering whether it's an overproduction, underproduction, overconsumption, underconsumption, and why. So the reason is that these externalities are ignored by the buyer and the seller. Okay, that's it for market failure, and then you just need to know the 4 examples, how to write about them and draw them. And then we now are going to move on to government intervention, which is the different ways to resolve these market failures or reduce these market failures.